Hello YouTube, my name's Sean Connors and welcome back to FanPub video number 5. And in this video we're going to try and tackle a couple of subjects that should take about 10 minutes in the video. And they are going to be all about handcuff players and waiver wire. And in that waiver wire video part we're going to also cover off the WAB budget, or the waiver acquisition budget that exists in some leagues. So let's start with handcuffs. Handcuffs are an interesting commodity because you'll hear a lot of fantasy advice and opinions from experts regarding who is the best handcuff to go with a certain player. So if you're unfamiliar with a handcuff, basically a handcuff is a player who is likely to get the next role if the player you really want goes down. So a best example to use would be somebody like Jamal Charles, running back for Kansas City. If he goes down, Noel Davis will definitely get the gig. And the advantage, of course, of knowing about Noel Davis is the fact that he is a credible number one running back anyway, really, to be honest with you. He can comfortably fill Jamal Charles's shoes. So he's a very simple pickup, a handcuff, if you will, if Jamal Charles goes down. Now, however, here's where it gets really interesting. It's very easy to say that. That's what you need to do. It's incredibly difficult to do. So the reason being that, well, at what point do you take the handcuff? Everybody in your league, if they're serious enough about American football and have enough knowledge, are going to realise who the handcuff players are. Okay. Now, we touched in a previous video about, sleepers. It's kind of, handcuffs and sleepers kind of go hand in hand when you think about it, don't they? And so knowing the next man up makes a huge difference to understanding how important it is. And you have to weigh up that handcuff, whether it's an important handcuff or not. So in the case of Jamal Charles, yeah, he has got a bit of an injury history. Even last year he missed a few games. I still believe he's a high injury risk personally, but that's based on my data information. So Noel Davis is going to be a player that I would target. Now, last year in our live draft, anybody that knows me knows that was a sneaky pickup because I really like Noel Davis. I think he's a very, very good number one running back, would grace any team actually if given the chance. And I look forward to the day that he does start with someone. However, everybody in your league is going to know it. So of course they're going to try and pick him up quite quickly once they've got their starters done. So it's very difficult to guarantee that you will, unless you're prepared to come in early. So handcuffing players is a very, very difficult thing to achieve. Like many strategies in American football, requires a lot of thought and a lot of decision making whether it's actually worth having the handcuff. In my opinion, taking my heart out of it, I'd ask one question, and one question only really with handcuffs. What are you doing if you're needing to handcuff a player? If the risks are that great that the handcuff's required, why bother with the player? Now, if you're going to back yourself that Jamal Charles is going to be the player this year, then do that. Don't try and overthink it. Believe that Jamal Charles will stay healthy and build your strategy around that, because you're going to have to come in really early to get Noel Davis to guarantee that handcuff. And who knows whether the team will go that way or not, depending on what happens with the handcuff. We've seen this so often. So don't overthink it. Pick players up that don't need a handcuff, because quite frankly, you're wasting your time, you're wasting your bench. And if you do pick a player that has a slight checkered history, believe in them and then follow that through. And that's really as simple advice as I can give on handcuffs. So now we're going to talk about the waiver wire system as it exists in most fantasy leagues. Now, very simply, the waiver wire system is a system where everybody will be given a waiver wire number, depending on how many teams are in your league, 1 through to whatever it may be. In our live league, it was 1 through to 16. If you've got the number 1 waiver wire order number, that pretty much means that you're going to get a player that you want. And you can put in more than one player, and the system will allot you will get one of them, and then, it's like a snake thing. You will get somebody, and then the waiver wire number 2 will get someone, and so on. But what actually happens with this in reality is, with large leagues particularly, if you're anywhere in the middle or later, you just won't get anybody. And I found this last year as a good example. I had a lot of injuries early on in the league and obviously needed replacement players and couldn't get anybody for 10 weeks. No matter how I went about it on waiver wire, I just didn't pick waiver wire players up till 10 weeks. The only reason I started picking them up after week 10 was because other coaches by that stage knew their season was over, so they were still involved, excuse me, but weren't as active. So the waiver wire system has its benefits because it will obviously favour the teams that are doing the worst and help them try to put some better players onto their bench, which is great. But if you're doing even remotely well, it takes a number of stumbles for your waiver wire number to come down. And so another example of that is last year I never lost back-to-back games. So my waiver wire was never under the halfway to 50% mark. So very difficult to get waiver wire pickups. But I accept that. You know, that's part of doing well. You have to accept it. But our commissioner this year has introduced the WAB system, the waiver wire acquisition budget, which is a finite resource. You have 100 points to play with. And this resource, is an attempt to create a fairer parity, I think, on the commissioner's part. And I respect that, because I think what it does is it means that anybody can bid for any player. You have a limited resource. When the points are gone, they're gone. But you can still bid for players. You just bid 0. And, no one else can. If no one else bids on it, you still get it. So it seems to me like a very, very fair resource. But of course, it is interesting, because any rule change in any league, and I'm going to let this be really crystal clear, creates a ripple. And it's up to you as a coach to examine the rule and find a way to utilise it for whatever you're going to do. So I believe this rule change has definitely made me think about the league draft, how I'm going to draft, how I'm going to tackle what players come up and what I'm going to do around them. You know, depending on what sort of player type comes up, it's going to be critical to my strategy going forward. It's going to create some interesting situations, and tactics and strategy will come in, because I'm sure coaches will be looking at other teams in their leagues, because we're in 4 leagues in our live league. And if I think someone's struggling around a particular player type, so if I think somebody's struggling around running backs, I think I might go in with a bid, because I want to stop them getting it, you see. So there's a lot of tactics that you can use. Plus, of course, any players you win, of course, are tradable. So it's a commodity. You're not losing. You might be losing the points, but you're gaining a tradable commodity. So there's a tremendous amount of tactics at play here. And I think this rule needs to you need to think about it, really carefully examine any changes in your league. So on the one hand, what I'm saying here is, yes, it makes it fair for all, but there is some tactical changes that occur because of this system that you need to think about and exploit, I think. And it is exploitation, because that's what all good strategy is all about. It's about finding something that others may not have looked at and going for it. Now, I'm not being very specific in this video, and there's a reason why, because obviously our league does not occur for a couple of months. And I am obviously going to wait till a few weeks into the season when I'm going to return to this video and talk about the WAB system in more detail, when we've got more clarity around how it's impacting a live league and what it's doing. And that's going to be fascinating. But without a doubt, the WAB system does create ripples. It's going to create ripples through the draft, and it's going to be fascinating what people are going to do with it. And I want to leave you with this final thought. Anybody out there, any coach out there that thinks you can just sit back for 4 or 5 weeks or 6 weeks, spend no money on the WAB system, and then come in as king of the hill, control everything, is eluding themselves for a number of reasons. You really do need to think this through, because the best players generally come out in the first few weeks that teams need to fall back and rely on and use. So you can't just sit back and try to be king of the hill with the cash because you think it's going to work. And you still have to bid on players anyway if you're going to win them. And if anybody's got any money left, how much are you going to bid? More than they've got? You'll soon run out of resources as well. So you really have to think this through very carefully, and don't let it just happen. Oh, I've got this pool of resource, what do I do with it? You've got to think it through now. I have been for months, and my strategy is well and truly set using WAB. But I wanted to touch in this video, and I'm sorry for lingering on a little bit around what waiver wire is, what WAB is, the differences very quickly between the two, how they can impact you, how it changes things throughout your draft, or at least give you some thoughts around it and some pointers. And I hope it's been of some use. Anyway, this has been NFL Fan Pub video number 5. I've been Sean Connors, and all that leaves me to say is happy fantasy gaming. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.